The dust of the Anatolian plateau hung in the air, a fine, golden gauze that shimmered in the dawn light. It was not stirred by wind, but by the footfalls of a body of men moving as one, a number so vast it seemed to drink the horizon. Ahead lay the Lydian capital of Sardis, its walls a stark silhouette against the rising sun. For Croesus, the fabulously wealthy king of Lydia, this was to be the defining moment of his reign, a final stand against the ascendant power from the east. He watched from the battlements, confident in his famed Lydian cavalry, the terror of Asia Minor. But as the Persian host arrayed itself before his city, his eyes were drawn not to its vastness, but to its glittering, unnerving core. At the very forefront, standing in serene, silent ranks, were men who seemed wrought from silver and gold. Their robes were rich, their trousers dark, their torsos clad in scaled armor that caught the first rays of the sun. But it was their spears, impossibly long and tipped with gleaming silver, that formed a forest of cold metal. And behind their faces, partially obscured by intricately woven cloth, their eyes held a disconcerting stillness. These were not the roaring barbarians of his nightmares. They were a silent, perfect instrument. These were the Anushia, the companions. The world would come to know them as the Immortals. Their story begins not on a battlefield, but in the revolutionary mind of Cyrus the Great. Having united the fractious Persian tribes and toppled the Median overlords, Cyrus looked upon his nascent empire and saw its weakness. It was a patchwork of loyalties, held together by his personal charisma and recent victory. He needed a force that was the physical embodiment of the empire itself, eternal, unwavering, and superior. He drew from across the Persian heartland, selecting not the largest or the loudest, but the most disciplined, the most loyal, and those of noble bearing. A myriad of 10,000 was the sacred number. They were to be more than soldiers. They were to be the court on the march, the constant companions of the King of Kings. Their equipment was not issued, it was bestowed, a mark of honor and a symbol of imperial might. The scale armor, the wicker shields, the short swords, the iron-tipped spears, and later, the signature long spears with counterweighted silver pomegranates, were uniform to a breathtaking degree. But the most ingenious aspect was not their gear, but their system. The immortal unit was never allowed to diminish. If a man fell to enemy steel, to sickness, or to age, he was replaced immediately, seamlessly, from a dedicated reserve of equal skill and appearance. To an outside observer, to a terrified enemy watching them fight day after day, the corps never lost strength. It was, for all intents and purposes, immortal. This was psychological warfare of the highest order. Under Cyrus and his successor, Cambyses, the Immortals were the iron fist within the velvet glove of imperial expansion. They marched into the fabled walls of Babylon not through brutal assault, but by diverting the Euphrates, a testament to the strategic mind they protected. They stood guard in the palaces of Memphis as Cambyses claimed the title of pharaoh. But their true crucible came with the accession of Darius, the master administrator. Darius, who carved the very image of the immortal into the timeless rock of Byzantium, who organized the satrapies and built the royal road, understood the value of symbol and reality. He formalized their structure, deepened their mystique, and made them the central pillar of his authority. They were with him when he crushed the rebellions that erupted across the empire upon his rise. their unwavering presence a stark message to any who would challenge the throne. In the sculpted reliefs of Persepolis, they stand forever frozen in procession, bearing spear and bow, their pleated robes flowing, their twisted headdresses, the kedaris, perfectly arranged. They are not depicted in the chaos of battle, but in the serene order of tribute, the foundation upon which the world's order rested. It was against the fractious, brilliant, and stubborn city-states of Greece that the legend of the Immortals met its most formidable challenge and was seared into the Western consciousness. When Darius sent his forces to punish Athens for its support of the Ionian revolt, the Immortals formed the core of the expedition. At the Battle of Marathon, however, the Greek hoplite phalanx, heavier and fighting for homeland, achieved the impossible. In the dust and blood of that plain, the Persian lines, including elements of the Immortals, broke under the ferocious Athenian charge. It was a shock, a stain on their invincibility, but the system held. The unit was replenished. The lesson was studied. A decade later, Darius's son, Xerxes, embarked on his colossal invasion to finish the task. And once more, the Immortals were the jewel of the host. Herodotus, our Greek chronicler, gazed upon them with a mixture of awe and dread. They were adorned with gold, and they brought with them covered carriages full of concubines and many well-equipped servants. Camels and beasts of burden carried their provisions, apart from the rest of the army. They were an empire on the march. It was at the narrow pass of Thermopylae that the Immortals faced their most famous test. For 2 days, Leonidas and his Spartans, along with their Greek allies, had held the massive Persian army at bay. The terrain negated Persian numbers and cavalry. Frustrated, Xerxes turned to his ultimate solution. He ordered the Immortals, led by their commander Hydarnes, to advance and clear the pass. This was their moment. The finest heavy infantry in the world would break a stubborn knot of Greeks. They advanced in their perfect order, a terrifying wall of discipline and gleaming metal. But in the tight confines, their longer spears and lighter armor became liabilities against the disciplined. Overlapping wall of Spartan shields and shorter, thrusting spears. The Greeks, fighting in shifts, fresh and determined, repulsed attack after attack. The Immortals fought with legendary courage, but they could not break the Spartan line. Their failure was a profound psychological victory for the Greeks and a shocking revelation for Persia. Even the Immortals had a limit, yet, true to their nature, they adapted. It was the Immortals, guided by a traitor along the mountain path, who ultimately outflanked the Greeks, leading to the heroic last stand of Leonidas. They turned defeat into operational success, but the myth of their invincibility in close combat had been punctured. The empire endured for centuries after Xerxes, and the Immortals endured with it. They were the king's personal guards in Susa and Persepolis, the enforcers of order in the provinces, the rapid response force for any rebellion. They saw the dynasty of the Achaemenids rise to unimaginable heights of grandeur, and then, over generations, begin to slowly petrify. The ritual of court, the endless ceremonies, the very perfection of their system, perhaps, bred a certain rigidity. They remained the best soldiers in the empire, but the empire itself was growing old. The spark of militant energy that had created them now burned brighter elsewhere, in the rocky, poor, and fiercely competitive land of Macedon. When the young Alexander led his veteran phalanx and irresistible companion cavalry into Asia. He was not facing the Persia of Cyrus or Darius. He faced a realm under the somewhat uncertain rule of Darius III. Yet the symbols of power remained, and foremost among them were the Immortals. At the decisive battle of Issus, and again at Gaugamela, the Immortals were stationed at the very heart of the Persian line, surrounding the king himself. Ancient sources describe them fighting with immense bravery. At Gaugamela, as Alexander's wedge smashed into the Persian left and aimed for the royal center, it was the Immortals who likely formed the last line of defense. They fought and died in their thousands around the chariot of their fleeing king. Their discipline held even in collapse, covering the retreat. But the world had changed. The Macedonian system, combined with Alexander's genius, proved superior. With Darius's murder by his own satraps, the Achaemenid mantle fell. Alexander entered Persepolis not just as a conqueror, but as a successor. What became of the last Immortals? Some may have been incorporated into Alexander's own growing multi-ethnic army, their skills too valuable to discard. Most simply melted away, their sacred number forever broken. Their reason for existence vanished with the empire they were created to sustain. Their legacy, however, proved truly immortal. They became the archetype of the elite professional guard, influencing everything from the Roman Praetorians to the Byzantine Varangians. The concept of a standing, permanent core of the best, answerable only to the sovereign, is a Persian invention given its perfect form in the myriad. But beyond military science, they live on as a powerful metaphor. They represent the relentless, faceless engine of empire, beautiful and terrible in its perfect order. They symbolize the illusion of permanence that all great powers cultivate, the idea that an institution can be made endless, flawless, and unchanging through sheer will and system. The dusty roads from Susa to Sardis, from Babylon to the banks of the Indus, knew the rhythm of their march. For over 2 centuries, they were the steady heartbeat of the world's first superpower, a heartbeat that insisted, through the silent, gleaming ranks of 10,000 ever-identical men, that the empire would never diminish, would never falter, would never die. And in that powerful, enduring idea, they succeeded long after their spears had turned to rust. Short YouTube description. They were the most feared elite soldiers of the ancient world, the Persian Immortals, a force that magically never lost strength, always standing at 10,000 men. How did this legendary unit operate? From their creation by Cyrus the Great to their epic clashes with Spartan warriors at Thermopylae, we delve into the history of the empire's eternal guard. Discover the ingenious system that maintained their numbers and the shocking truth behind their famous defeats. This is the story of the military marvel that forged the Persian Empire.